The Siege of Barad-dûr, an epic tale of Middle-earth. In the days when the shadow of Mordor lay heavy upon the lands of Middle-earth, there came tidings most dire to the halls of Minas Tirith. The white tree stood withered in the court of the fountain, and the stewards of Gondor held vigil against the encroaching darkness that spread from the black land beyond the Duat. It was in those times that Aldenor the Wise, last of the great lore masters of Osgiliath, came before the throne of Denethor, bearing scrolls of ancient prophecy. The parchments, yellowed with age and written in the flowing script of the Númenóreans, spoke of a secret weakness in the foundations of Barad-dûr itself, a flaw wrought into the very stone when the tower was first raised by the Dark Lord's hand. "My lord," spoke Aldenor, his voice trembling with the weight of his discovery, "these writings tell of the Palantir of Ithilien, hidden in the ruins of Osgiliath when the city fell. Through its seeing stone, the ancient kings perceived that Barad-dûr was built upon a foundation of corrupted mithril, drawn from the depths of Khazad-dûm before its fall. Should this foundation be struck with weapons blessed by the light of Arundil's star, the tower would crumble as surely as sand before the tide." Denethor's eyes gleamed with a light that was both hope and madness. "And where lies this Palantir, Master Lorekeeper?" "In the House of the Dead, beneath the ruins where the Dome of Stars once stood proud against the sky. But my lord, the way is perilous, and the shadows of the Nazgûl ride thick upon the borders of the Pelennor." Thus began the great council that would shape the fate of all free peoples. Ravens were sent to Rohan, to Lothlorien, and to the distant halls of Erebor. The horns of Gondor rang out across the Pelennor fields, calling all who would stand against the shadow to gather beneath the banner of the White Tree. From the grey havens of Mithlond came ships bearing the remaining Noldor, their banners gleaming with the light of the undying lands. Glorfindel himself rode at their head, his golden hair catching the last rays of the setting sun. From the depths of Fangorn Forest came the Ents, their voices like the groaning of ancient trees, led by Treebeard, the oldest. But perhaps most unexpected of all was the arrival of Balin, son of Fundin, who had survived the retaking of Moria, and now led a company of battle-hardened dwarves, bearing weapons forged in the fires of the Lonely Mountain. His beard was streaked with silver, and his eyes held the grim determination of one who had looked upon the Balrog's flame and lived. "The shadow grows long," he spoke to the assembled host, "and the time for hiding in our mountain halls has passed. The dwarves of Durin's folk will stand with men and elves once more, as we did in the days of the last Alliance." As the council drew to its close, Denethor rose from his throne, and for a moment, the madness that would later claim him seemed to lift like morning mist. "Let it be known throughout all the lands that we march not merely to war, but to the very gates of hell itself. We go to break the Dark Tower and cast down the throne of shadow forever." The preparations began at once. The forges of Minas Tirith rang day and night, as smiths worked to create weapons capable of piercing the darkness. The great siege engines were pulled from their housings beneath the city, their timbers groaning as they were made ready for the long march east. On the third day of Virisa, when the spring winds carried the scent of blooming Malorn trees from distant Lothlorien, the great host set forth from Minas Tirith. The sight was beyond all telling, a river of steel and banners flowing eastward like a tide of starlight against the growing darkness. At the van rode Prince Imrahil of Dol Amroth, his knights arrayed in silver mail that caught the morning light like scales of some great fish. Behind him came the rangers of Ithilien, led by Faramir, their green cloaks making them seem like shadows cast by the turning leaves. The men of Rohan thundered on their flanks, their spears like a forest of ash wood, with Éomer King at their head upon Firefoot. But it was the sight of the elves that stirred the hearts of all who beheld them. They moved with a grace that seemed to defy the very earth beneath their feet, their voices raised in songs that spoke of the light beyond the circles of the world. Glorfindel bore the banner of Gil-galad, and upon it was wrought the device of the star and the silver tree, gleaming with its own inner light. The road to Osgiliath was long and fraught with peril. The Nazgul had not been idle in their dark tower, and fell beasts circled overhead like carrion birds. Twice the host was forced to form the great circle, shields locked and spears bristling outward as the nine swept down from the clouded sky. It was during the second of these attacks that the mettle of the alliance was truly tested. The Witch King himself descended upon them, his fell beasts shriek, turning the blood to ice in their vein. But Glorfindel rose to meet him, his sword Eglos blazing with the light of the two trees, and the two mighty lords clashed in the air above the host. The battle was fierce and terrible to behold. Lightning crackled from the Witch King's blade, while Glorfindel's sword sang with the music of the spheres. At last, with a cry that shook the very foundations of the earth, the Elf Lord struck down the Nazgul's mount, sending both rider and beast plummeting into the marshes below. "The Lord of the Nazgul is fallen!" cried Faramir, raising his horn to his lips. The sound echoed across the Pelennor like the call of eagles, and a great cheer rose from the host. But their joy was short-lived. As they crested the hill that looked down upon the ruins of Osgiliath, they beheld a sight that chilled their hearts. The ancient city was not empty as they had hoped. Black banners flew from every tower that still stood, and the broken bridge over the Anduin swarmed with orcs and trolls beyond counting. "It seems the enemy has anticipated our coming," said Eomer grimly, his hand resting on the hilt of Guthwini. "The city is taken, and our path to the Palantir is barred." Aldenor stepped forward, his eyes studying the lay of the land with the wisdom of years. "There is another way, my lords. The ancient sewers beneath the city run deep. Built in the days when Osgiliath was the jewel of Gondor, they emerge near the Dome of Stars, and if we can find the entrance, a path through darkness and filth," growled Balin, stroking his beard. "It has a certain appeal to one who has walked the deeps of Moria." Thus was the plan set in motion. While the main host would assault the city from the west, drawing the enemy's attention, a smaller company would infiltrate the sewers and seek the hidden Palantir. The volunteers for this perilous mission were few but stalwart. Faramir and a dozen of his rangers, Balin with 6 dwarves, and Glorfindel with 3 of his kinsmen. As night fell over the ruins, the infiltrators made their way to the hidden entrance that Aldenor had marked upon his maps. The grating was rusted and overgrown with thorns, but dwarf axes made short work of both. One by one, they descended into the darkness beneath the city, their way lit only by the faint glow of Glorfindel's sword. The tunnels were worse than they had imagined. The stench was overwhelming, and strange sounds echoed from the depths, the skittering of unseen creatures and the distant splash of things best left unnamed. But worst of all was the feeling of being watched, as if the very walls had eyes. "Stay close," whispered Faramir, his bow strung and ready. "The enemy has had long years to prepare defenses we cannot imagine." They had not gone far when their fears proved justified. From the darkness ahead came a sound like grinding stone, and into the circle of their light stepped a creature of nightmare. A troll, but not like any they had faced before. Its hide was pale as bone, and its eyes glowed with an inner fire. Most terrible of all, it wore about its neck a chain of mithril, and from the chain hung a small, dark stone. "One of the Olog-hai!" breathed Glorfindel, raising his sword. "The enemy has set guardians upon the path." The battle in the narrow tunnel was fierce and desperate. The troll's reach was great, and its claws could tear through mail as if it were cloth. But the skill of the Elf Lord, the courage of men and dwarves, proved true. At last, Balin's axe found its mark, and the creature fell with a crash that shook dust from the ancient stone. As they searched the body, Faramir made a discovery that chilled his blood. The stone upon the creature's chain was not natural. It was a fragment of a Palantir, dark and corrupted, but still holding a spark of its ancient power. "The enemy knows of our coming," he said grimly. "Through this shard, he has watched our every move." The revelation of the corrupted Seeing Stone cast a shadow over the company that went deeper than the darkness of the tunnel. If the enemy had indeed foreseen their mission, then every step forward might be leading them into a trap, carefully prepared by the will of Sauron himself. Yet, there was no choice but to press on. The fate of Middle-earth hung in the balance, and the Palantir of Ithilien remained their only hope of finding the weakness in Barad-dûr's foundation. With heavy hearts, they continued through the labyrinthine passages beneath Osgiliath, their way lit by the pale glow of Glorfindel's blade. The sewers gradually gave way to older construction, great halls carved from living rock in the days when the kings of Gondor ruled from sea to sea. Here the architecture spoke of a grander age, with columns wrought in the likeness of malorn trees and walls adorned with the images of the two trees of Valinor. But all was overlaid with the dust of ages, and shadows seemed to cling to every corner. "We draw near," whispered Aldenor, consulting his ancient maps by the light of an elf stone. "The House of the Dead lies just beyond this hall. But be warned, the texts speak of guardians that are not of the living world." As if summoned by his words, a chill wind began to blow through the corridors, though no opening to the outer air could be seen. The temperature dropped until their breath came in visible clouds, and frost began to form upon the ancient stone. From somewhere ahead came the sound of weeping, not the tears of the living, but the lament of those who had passed beyond the circles of the world, yet could not find rest. The company pressed forward, their weapons drawn, until they emerged into a vast circular chamber. Here stood the House of the Dead, its entrance marked by statues of the kings of old, their stone faces worn smooth by the passage of years. But it was not the statue that held their attention. It was the figures that moved between them. Wraiths walked among the tombs, their forms shifting between shadow and pale light. They wore the raiment of ancient nobles, their crowns and torques gleaming with spectral fire. As the company approached, the spirits turned toward them, and their voices rose in a chorus of despair. "Who disturbs the sleep of the dead?" they cried. "Who brings the warmth of life into these halls of sorrow?" Glorfindel stepped forward, his sword held high. The light of Eglos seemed to give the wraiths pause, and their leader, a tall figure in robes of midnight blue, raised his hand for silence. "I am Isildur's heir in spirit, if not in blood," the elf lord declared. "I who fought at the side of Gil-galad in the last alliance claim the right to enter these halls. The darkness rises again, and the dead must aid the living in this final hour." The Wraith King considered these words, his hollow eyes studying each member of the company in turn. When his gaze fell upon Balin, he seemed to start with surprise. "A dwarf in the House of the Dead? Long have your people shunned the ways of shadow and spirit. What brings you to seek the Palantir of Ithilien?" Balin stepped forward, his axe gleaming in the eldritch light. "I seek it because the darkness threatens all the children of Ilúvatar, living and dead alike. If Sauron triumphs, even these halls will know no peace." The Wraith King nodded slowly. "Truth rings in your words, son of Fundin. But know this, the seeing stone you seek is not unguarded. The last king of Gondor bound it with spells of power, that it might not be taken by unworthy hands. 3 trials must you face, and only by passing them all may you claim the Palantir." The first trial was one of courage. The company was led to a chamber where the air itself seemed to writhe with malevolent presence. Here dwelt the mouth of Sauron, not the lieutenant of Barad-dûr, but an ancient evil that had taken root in the very stone of Osgiliath. It rose before them like a pillar of black flame, its voice the whisper of despair itself. "Turn back," it hissed. "Turn back while you still draw breath. The Master sees all, knows all. Your quest is doomed, and your deaths will be slow and full of torment." But Faramir stood firm, his bow drawn and an arrow nocked. "We have faced the shadow before, and found it wanting. Your threats hold no power over those who serve the light." The creature lunged forward, its form shifting between shadow and flame. The battle was joined with fury, and for a moment it seemed that the darkness might prevail. But then Glorfindel's voice rose in song, not the battle cry of the Noldor, but the ancient hymn of the Valar themselves. The melody pierced the creature's essence like a blade of light, and with a shriek of agony, it dissolved into nothingness. The second trial was one of wisdom. They were brought before a great door of adamant, upon which were inscribed riddles in the tongue of the Númenórean. The Wraith King spoke, "Answer all 7 riddles correctly, and the door shall open. Fail in even one, and the way forward shall be barred forever." Aldenor stepped forward, his knowledge of lore proving invaluable. One by one, the riddles were solved. The mystery of the Silmarils, the secret of the Rings of Power, the true name of the flame imperishable. But the 7th riddle proved the most difficult of all. What is the greatest strength of the Dark Lord, and yet also his greatest weakness? The company pondered long, for the riddle seemed to have no answer. It was Balin who finally spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of hard-won wisdom. His greatest strength is that he pours his malice into all his works, making them mighty beyond measure. Yet this is also his weakness, for he cannot create, only corrupt, and that which is corrupted can be cleansed, while that which is created in malice will turn upon itself in the end. The door swung open with a grinding of ancient hinges, revealing the innermost chamber of the House of the Dead. Here, upon a pedestal of black marble, rested the Palantir of Ithilien. But as they approached, they found their way barred by the 3rd and final trial. The last king of Gondor himself stood before the Seeing Stone, his form more substantial than the other wraiths. His eyes held the weight of ages, and his voice carried the authority of the Númenórean king. "I am Ernur, last king of Gondor, who rode to challenge the Witch King and never return. I have waited here through all the long years, guardian of the Palantir, keeper of the last hope. You seek to take the Seeing Stone to war against the Dark Tower itself?" "We do, my king," replied Faramir, kneeling before the ghostly monarch. The hour of final battle approaches, and without the Palantir, we cannot find the weakness in Barad-dûr's foundations. Ernur studied them all, his gaze lingering longest on Glorfindel. "You were there," he said to the Elf Lord. "You were there when the last alliance was broken, when Isildur failed to cast the ring into the fire. Will you succeed where others have failed?" "I cannot promise victory," Glorfindel replied, "but I swear upon the light of Arendil that we will not fail for want of trying." The king nodded slowly. "Then take the Palantir, and may it serve you better than it served me. But know this, once you look into its depths, you will see not only the weakness of Barad-dûr, but the full extent of the darkness that awaits you. Some knowledge is too terrible for mortal minds to bear." With trembling hands, Faramir lifted the Seeing Stone from its pedestal. It was cold to the touch, and heavier than its size suggested. As his fingers closed around it, images flashed through his mind. Visions of the Dark Tower's construction, of the corrupted mithril veins that ran beneath its foundation, of the secret entrance that led to the very heart of the fortress. But he saw other things as well. The vast armies of Mordor, the flying Nazgûl, the terrible presence of the Eye itself. For a moment, he felt the weight of despair settling upon his soul like a shroud of lead. "The vision is clear," he gasped, his face pale with the strain. "I know the way to Barad-dûr's heart, but the cost. The cost will be beyond all reckoning." The return journey through the tunnels beneath Osgiliath was fraught with new perils. Word of their success had somehow reached the enemy's ears, and the passages that had been merely dangerous before now swarmed with orcs and wolves. The company fought their way through running battles, their supply of arrows dwindling with each encounter. It was during one such skirmish that disaster struck. As they emerged from a side passage into a larger chamber, they found themselves surrounded by a full company of Uruk-hai, led by a captain whose armor bore the red eye of Sauron. The battle was fierce and desperate, and though they fought with the valor of heroes, they were sorely outnumbered. In the midst of the fighting, Balin found himself separated from the others, driven back by 3 Uruks, wielding crude but effective scimitars. His axe sang as it clove through armor and bone, but for every orc that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. It was then that he heard the sound that chilled his blood, the hunting horn of the Nazgul echoing through the tunnels like a death knell. "Fly, you fools!" he roared, even as his axe bit deep into an Uruk's skull. "The Nine come, and we cannot stand against them in this place." Glorfindel's voice rose above the din of battle. "To me, kinsmen, form the circle, and let none pass." The elves drew together, their blades weaving a wall of light around the company. But even as they fought, the sound of the horn grew louder, and the temperature in the chamber began to drop. The Witch King himself appeared at the mouth of the tunnel, his form wreathed in shadow and flame. His mace dripped with a substance that was not quite blood, and his eyes were holes in the darkness that seemed to drink in the light around them. "You have something that belongs to my master," he hissed, his voice like the scraping of bone on stone. "Give me the Palantir, and I will grant you swift deaths." But Faramir clutched the seeing stone tighter to his chest. "Never shall the darkness reclaim what the light has won. We will die first." The Witch King laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Death? You speak of death as if it were an ending. For you, it will be only the beginning of torment." He raised his mace to strike, but before he could bring it down, Glorfindel stepped between them. The Elf Lord's blade blazed with the light of the two trees, and for a moment, the Nazgul drew back. "You cannot stand against me forever, Elf Lord," the Witch King snarled. "I am deathless, and your light grows dim." "Perhaps," Glorfindel replied calmly, "but I need not stand forever. Only long enough." The battle between the two ancient powers was terrible to behold. Light and shadow clashed in the confined space, each strike sending shock waves through the stone around them. The other members of the company fought their own battle, but all eyes were drawn to the titanic struggle between the Elf Lord and the Lord of the Nazgul. In the end, it was not skill or strength that decided the battle, but sacrifice. Seeing that the Witch King was slowly gaining the upper hand, Glorfindel made a choice would echo through the ages. Gathering all his remaining power, he struck not at his opponent, but at the ceiling above them. The ancient stone, weakened by centuries of neglect and the violence of their battle, came crashing down. The Witch King's shriek of rage was cut short as tons of rubble buried him, and the sound of his horn was heard no more. But Glorfindel, too, was caught in the avalanche. As the last of the company fled through the collapsing tunnel, they heard his voice raised in song, not a lament, but a song of triumph that spoke of the light beyond the shadow. When the dust settled, the way behind them was sealed, and Glorfindel the Balrog Slayer was no more. The company had escaped, but at a cost that none of them would ever forget. They emerged from the tunnels to find the battle for Osgiliath still raging. The main host had succeeded in drawing the enemy's attention, but they had paid dearly for it. The bridges over the Anduin ran red with blood, and the ancient towers of the city were wreathed in smoke and flame. Prince Imrahil met them at the rendezvous point, his silver armor dented and stained with orc blood. "The Palantir?" he asked urgently. Faramir nodded grimly. "We have it, but Glorfindel is lost, and the way back is sealed. We must find another path to Barad-dûr." "Thars? There is no other path," said Eomer, his face grim. "The Black Gate is sealed, and the Nazgul guard every pass through the Efelduath. We would need wings to reach the Dark Tower." It was then that Aldanor stepped forward, his ancient eyes gleaming with sudden inspiration. "Wings," he murmured. "Yes, perhaps there is a way. The Palantir has shown us the weakness in Barad-dûr's foundation, but it has also revealed something else, a secret that the enemy believes is his alone." He gestured to the seeing stone in Faramir's hands. "Look again into its depths, but this time seek not the present, but the past. Look to the days when the tower was first built, and see how the Dark Lord brought the corrupted Mithril from the depths of Khazad-dûm." Faramir hesitated, remembering the terrible visions he had seen before, but the need was great, and with a deep breath, he peered once more into the Palantir's depths. The images came flooding back, visions of the Second Age, when Sauron still wore a fair form and walked openly among the peoples of Middle-earth. He saw the Dark Lord in the guise of Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, working side by side with the dwarves of Barad-dûr to mine the precious mithril from the deepest shaft. But there was something else, something that made Faramir's blood run cold. The mithril was not being mined. It was being grown, cultivated like some terrible crop in the darkness beneath the mountains. And the seeds of this growth were fragments of the Silmarils themselves, corrupted and twisted by the Dark Lord's malice. "Impossible," breathed Balin, his face pale. "The Silmarils were holy things, created by Feanor himself. How could they be corrupted?" Aldanor's voice was heavy with sorrow, because one of them was not destroyed. When Arundel bore his star into the sky, one fell to earth, and the Dark Lord found it. Through long years of labor, he shattered it into countless fragments, each one a seed of corruption that would grow into the twisted mithril of Barad-dûr's foundation. The implications were staggering. If the corrupted mithril was indeed grown from fragments of a Silmaril, then it would be nearly indestructible. No mortal weapon could hope to damage it, and even the blessed blades of the elves might prove insufficient. "Then we have failed before we began," said Éomer bitterly. "If the foundations cannot be destroyed, then Barad-dûr will stand forever." But Balin shook his head slowly. "Not necessarily. There is one thing that might work. The Arkenstone of Erebor. It is said to be a fragment of the Silmarils that fell to earth in the Elder Days, pure and uncorrupted. If we could bring it to bear against the twisted mithril, the Arkenstone is in the Lonely Mountain," protested Faramir. "It would take weeks to reach Erebor, and we do not have weeks. The enemy's armies are already on the march." It was then that the sound of wings filled the air above them. The company looked up to see the great eagles of the misty mountains circling overhead, their cries echoing across the ruined city. At their head flew Gwaihir, the Wind Lord, his golden eyes fixed upon the small band of heroes below. "Glorfindel was known to us," the great eagle called down. "He saved my people from the Balrog's fire in days long past. For his sake, and for the sake of all who love the light, we will bear you to the Lonely Mountain. But know this, the journey is perilous, and the enemy's fell beasts will not suffer our passage unchallenged." Hope kindled in the hearts of the company, but it was tempered by the knowledge of the dangers ahead. The skies above Middle-earth were no longer safe, and the Nazgul's winged steeds were swift and terrible. "We will come," said Faramir without hesitation, "but we must reach Erebor within 3 days, or all our efforts will be in vain." Gwaihir's laugh was like the sound of wind through mountain peaks. "3 days? We are the Eagles of Manwë, son of Gondor. We will reach the Lonely Mountain by tomorrow's dawn, or die in the attempt." As the company prepared to depart, Prince Imrahil approached Faramir one last time. "You carry the hopes of all free people," he said solemnly. "May the light of Arundel shine upon your path." The ascent into the sky was both exhilarating and terrifying. The great eagles climbed higher and higher, until the ruins of Osgiliath dwindled to toy size below them. The wind whipped through their hair, and the cold bit at their exposed skin. But there was a freedom in flight that none of them had ever experienced. Yet even as they soared through the clouds, dark shapes began to appear on the horizon. The Nazgul had taken wing, their fell beasts shrieking challenges across the sky. The race to Erebor had begun, and the fate of Middle-earth hung in the balance. The battle in the skies above the Anduin was unlike any that had been fought since the Elder Days. The great eagles of the misty mountains, their wings spanning 20 feet or more, wheeled and dove with the grace of dancers and the ferocity of warriors. Upon their backs rode the remnants of the company, their weapons glinting in the afternoon sun as they fought to defend their aerial steed. The Nazgul's fell beasts were terrible to behold, creatures of shadow and malice with wingspan that dwarfed even the mightiest eagle. Their hides were black as midnight, and their eyes glowed with the fires of hatred. From their throats came shrieks that could curdle the blood of the bravest warriors, and their claws could rend steel as easily as parchment. Faramir, riding upon Gwaihir's broad back, found himself face to face with the Witch King himself. The Lord of the Nazgul had somehow survived the collapse of the tunnel, his form now wreathed in shadows that seemed to drink in the light around them. His mace whistled through the air, missing the ranger's head by inches. "You cannot escape me, son of Denethor," the Witch King hissed. "I am deathless, and I am patient. I will pursue you to the ends of the earth if need be." But Faramir's reply was the song of his bow, sending arrow after arrow into the creature's mount. The shafts, blessed by the light of Arundel, found their mark time and again, and the fell beast's shrieks of pain echoed across the sky. Nearby, Balin clung to the back of another eagle. His axe gleaming, he fought off the attacks of two Nazgûl simultaneously. The dwarf's beard whipped in the wind, and his eyes blazed with the fury of his ancestor. Each swing of his weapon was precise and deadly, and more than one of the enemy's servants felt the bite of dwarven steel. But it was clear that the eagles were outmatched. For every fell beast that was brought down, two more seemed to take its place. The Nazgûl's numbers were inexhaustible, and their mounts felt no pain, no fear, no mercy. "We cannot win this battle," called Gwaihir over the roar of the wind. "We must reach the shelter of the mountain, or all is lost." The great eagle banked sharply to the east, leading his kindred toward the distant peaks of the misty mountain. But the Nazgûl were swift in pursuit, their fell beasts' wings beating like the drums of war. The race was desperate, and the outcome far from certain. It was then that salvation came from an unexpected quarter. From the peaks of the misty mountains rose a sound that none had heard for long years, the deep, resonant call of the great horns of Khazad-dûm. The dwarves of Erebor had not forgotten their ancient kinship with their cousins of Moria, and Dain Ironfoot had sent his swiftest warriors to aid in the battle. The sky filled with the whir of crossbow bolts and the gleam of thrown axes as the dwarven warriors emerged from hidden positions in the mountain peaks. Their aim was true, and their weapons were forged with the skill of generations. The Nazgûl's fell beast, mighty though they were, could not withstand the concentrated fire of the dwarven host. One by one, the creatures of shadow began to fall. The Witch King himself, his mount pierced by a dozen crossbow bolts, was forced to withdraw to the eastern sky. His parting words were a curse that seemed to darken the very air around them. "You have won this battle, but the war is far from over. The Master's eye is upon you, and his wrath will know no bound." As the last of the Nazgûl disappeared into the distance, the eagles alighted upon the peaks of the misty mountains. The company dismounted, their legs shaking from the ordeal of aerial combat. But there was no time to rest. The sun was already setting, and they had many miles yet to travel. Dain Ironfoot himself greeted them at the entrance to the dwarven hall. His beard was white as snow, and his eyes held the wisdom of long years, but his grip was still strong as iron when he clasped Balin's hand. "Well met, cousin," he said with a smile, "though I fear your timing could have been better. The enemy's armies are on the march, and our scouts report that Barad-dûr itself stirs with new activity. All the more reason to make haste," replied Balin urgently. "We must reach Erebor before the dawn, or all our efforts will be in vain." Dain nodded grimly. "Then you shall have our swiftest ponies and our best guide. But know this, the path to the lonely mountain is watched. The enemy has not forgotten the wealth of Erebor, and his servants prowl the roads like wolves." The journey through the night was fraught with peril. The company rode hard along the ancient dwarf roads, their ponies' hooves striking sparks from the stone. Behind them, the sky glowed with an evil light as the fires of Mordor spread across the southern horizon. The very air seemed to thicken with malice, and more than once they were forced to take shelter as winged shadows passed overhead. But the dwarven guides knew every stone and stream of the mountain path, and by dawn they had reached the gates of Erebor. The lonely mountain rose before them like a sleeping giant, its peak wreathed in morning mist. The great doors stood open, and from within came the sound of hammers ringing on anvil. The dwarves of Erebor were preparing for war. King Thorin III, son of Dain, met them at the threshold. He was tall for a dwarf, with a bearing that spoke of royal blood. and a voice that carried the authority of his ancestors. His eyes were the color of sapphires, and his beard was braided with threads of mithril. "You seek the Arkenstone," he said without preamble. "I have had word from the ravens, and I know of your quest. But you ask much. The heart of the mountain is the most precious treasure of my people." Faramir stepped forward, the palantir still clutched in his hands. "Your Majesty, we do not ask lightly. The fate of all Middle-earth hangs in the balance. Without the Arkenstone, Barad-dûr cannot be destroyed, and the darkness will spread until it covers all the world." Thorin studied the ranger for a long moment, his gaze seeming to pierce through to the very soul. "Show me," he said at last. "Let me see in the palantir what you have seen." With trembling hands, Faramir offered the seeing stone to the dwarf king. Thorin took it carefully, his fingers closing around the smooth surface. For a moment, his eyes grew distant, and his face paled as visions flashed through his mind. When he finally looked up, his expression was grave. "I see the truth of your word. The corrupted mithril beneath Barad-dûr can indeed be destroyed by the power of the Arkenstone. But the task will require more than one bearer. The stone must be carried to the very heart of the Dark Tower and placed upon the foundation stone itself. Then we will do what must be done," said Balin simply. "We have come too far to turn back now." Thorin nodded slowly. "Very well, but know this. The Arkenstone is not merely a gem. It is a fragment of the music of creation itself, and its power is beyond the understanding of mortal. It will change those who bear it, and not all changes are welcome." The dwarf king led them deep into the mountain, through halls that had been carved from living rock by the hands of Durin himself. The walls were adorned with tapestries depicting the history of the Longbeards, and the air was filled with the soft light of crystal lamps. But it was the sight of the throne room that took their breath away. The Arkenstone rested upon a pedestal of pure mithril, its facets catching and reflecting the light until it seemed to burn with an inner fire. It was beautiful beyond description, and yet there was something in its radiance that spoke of power beyond mortal comprehension. "Behold the heart of the mountain," said Thorin solemnly. "It has rested here since the founding of Erebor, and its light has never dimmed. But if you would bear it to war, you must first prove yourselves worthy." The trial was unlike any they had faced before. The Arkenstone itself seemed to test them, projecting their deepest fears and desires into the very air around them. Faramir saw himself as steward of Gondor, ruling with wisdom and justice. Balin beheld the halls of Moria restored to their former glory, filled once more with the songs of his people. But with the visions came temptation. The stone whispered promises of power, of glory, of dominion over all the peoples of Middle-earth. It would be so easy to claim it for themselves, to use its power to reshape the world according to their will. It was Aldenor who broke the spell. The old lore master stepped forward, his eyes fixed not on the stone, but on the faces of his companions. "Remember why we came," he said quietly. "Not for power, not for glory, but for the sake of all who love the light. The Arkenstone is not a prize to be won, but a tool to be used in service of others." The temptation passed, and the stone's light seemed to grow warmer, more welcoming. Thorin nodded in approval. "You have proven yourselves worthy. Take the Arkenstone, and may it serve you well in the dark days ahead." But even as Faramir reached for the stone, alarms began to sound throughout the mountain. The deep horns of Erebor rang out like the voice of doom, and the sound of running feet echoed through the halls. "The enemy comes!" cried a messenger, bursting into the throne room. "The armies of Mordor march upon the mountain, and the sky is black with fell beasts. We are besieged." The assault upon the lonely mountain began with the rising of the sun. From the east came the sound of countless feet upon the stones, and the air grew thick with the smoke of torches and the dust of marching armies. The forces of Mordor had come in strength, and their numbers were beyond all counting. At their head rode the mouth of Sauron, the Dark Lord's lieutenant, his black armor gleaming in the morning light. His helm was wrought in the likeness of a skull, and his voice carried the authority of his master when he called upon the defenders to surrender. "Baruch-Hazad," he cried in the black speech, "surrender the thieves who have stolen from the dark tower, and your deaths will be swift. Resist, and the mountain itself will become your tomb." But Thorin's answer was the ringing of steel upon steel as the great gates of Erebor swung shut. The dwarves of the lonely mountain had faced worse odds before, and they would not yield to the servants of darkness. The siege engines of Mordor were terrible to behold. Great catapults hurled stones the size of houses against the mountain's flanks, and battering rams, worked by teams of trolls, thundered against the gates. The sky darkened with the smoke of fires set by the enemy's engineers, and the sound of their war horns echoed from peak to peak. But the dwarves were not defenseless. From hidden positions in the mountain slopes, their crossbows sang their deadly song. The ancient defenses of Erebor had been built to withstand the assault of dragon, and they proved more than adequate against the forces of Mordor. In the midst of the battle, the company faced a terrible choice. The Arkenstone was in their hands, but they were trapped within the mountain. Outside, the enemy's armies stretched as far as the eye could see, while overhead, the Nazgûl circled like vultures waiting for the kill. "We must find another way," said Faramir, his face grim with determination. "The Arkenstone is useless to us here. We must reach Barad-dûr before the Dark Lord realizes what we intend." It was then that Balin spoke up, his eyes gleaming with sudden inspiration. "There is a way," he said slowly. "The old dragon tunnels that Smaug used to reach the treasure chamber. They extend deep into the mountain, and some say they connect to the ancient roads that lead to Moria." Thorin's eyes widened. "The dragon paths? They have been sealed for generations, and none know what creatures might dwell in their depths. Then we must unseal them," replied Balin firmly. "It is our only hope." The descent into the dragon tunnels was like entering the very bowels of the earth. The passages were vast beyond imagine, carved from the living rock by the passage of Smaug's great body. The walls were scorched black by dragon fire, and the air was thick with the scent of sulfur and decay. But worse than the physical dangers were the phantoms that haunted the tunnel. The dying dreams of Smaug still lingered in the darkness, and more than once the company found themselves facing visions of the great dragon himself, his eyes burning with malevolent fire. "It is not real," Aldenor reminded them as they pressed deeper into the mountain. "The dragon is long dead, and these are but echoes of his malice." Yet the phantoms felt real enough, and their claws could rend flesh as surely as steel. The company fought their way through nightmare after nightmare, their weapons blazing with the light of blessed steel. At last, they reached the deepest point of the tunnels, where the old dragon roads connected to the ancient highways of the dwarves. Here they found something unexpected, a company of dwarves from the Blue Mountains, led by Thorin's cousin, Nain. They had come to aid in the defense of Erebor, but had been trapped in the tunnels when the siege began. "Well met, cousin," said Nain, his axe gleaming in the light of their torches. "Though I fear we bring ill tidings. The enemy's forces are not limited to those outside the mountain. His servants have found other ways into the deeps, and they come from below as well as above." As if summoned by his words, the sound of marching feet echoed from the depths of the tunnel. From the darkness emerged a host of orcs and goblins, their weapons gleaming with poisoned steel. At their head stalked a creature of nightmare, a Balrog, its form wreathed in shadow and flame. "A demon of the ancient world," breathed Aldenor. "I thought they were all destroyed in the fall of Gondolin." "Not all," replied the Balrog, in a voice like grinding stone. "Some of us endured, waiting in the deep places of the earth for the call of our master. Now, the hour of darkness has come, and we shall claim dominion over all the children of Ilúvatar." The battle in the dragon tunnels was fierce beyond description. The confined space worked against the Balrog's size, but also limited the defender's ability to maneuver. The creature's whip of flame lashed out again and again, and its sword dripped with a fire that could melt steel. But the dwarves of Erebor and the Blue Mountains were made of stern stuff. Their axes rang against the demon's hide, and their war cries echoed through the tunnels like the voice of the earth itself. Balin himself led the charge, his axe blazing with the light of his ancestor. The turning point came when Faramir, drawing upon the power of the Arkenstone, managed to blind the Balrog with a burst of pure light. In that moment of confusion, the combined assault of the dwarves proved too much for even the demon to withstand. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the mountain, the Balrog fell. But its death throes brought down vast sections of the tunnel, and the company found themselves racing against time to reach the surface before they were buried alive. They emerged from the tunnels to find the siege of Erebor at its height. The gates had been breached, and the enemy's forces were pouring into the lower halls. But the sight that greeted them in the throne room was one that would haunt their dream forever. The mouth of Sauron stood over the fallen body of King Thorin III, his black sword dripping with royal blood. Around him lay the bodies of the mountain's defenders, their axes still clutched in their lifeless hands. "Too late," the Dark Lord's lieutenant sneered. "The mountain has fallen, and its king lies dead. Soon, all of Middle-earth will bow before the might of the Dark Lord." But his triumph was short-lived. From the shadows stepped a figure that none had expected to see. Glorfindel, his golden hair now streaked with silver, his armor dented and scorched, but his eyes still burning with the light of the undying land. "I am returned," he said simply, "and I bring word from the west. The ships of the Eldar sail even now for the Grey Haven, and the Valor themselves stir in their hall. The final battle approaches, and the darkness will not prevail." The mouth of Sauron's sneer faltered. "Impossible. You were destroyed in the tunnels of Osgiliath." "Destroyed?" Glorfindel laughed, and the sound was like silver bells. "I am of the undying land, servant of shadow. Death has no power over me, save by my own choice, and I choose to stand against the darkness until the very end of days." The battle was joined anew, but this time the tide turned in favor of the light. Glorfindel's sword blazed with the fire of the stars, and before its light, the servants of darkness fled like mist before the dawn. But even as they celebrated their victory, word came that chilled their hearts. The armies of Mordor were on the march, and Barad-dûr itself was preparing for war. The siege of Erebor had been but a distraction. The real target was the great fortress of Minas Tirith, where the remnants of the free peoples had gathered for their final stand. "We must make haste," said Faramir, clutching the Arkenstone to his chest. "The enemy seeks to divide our forces, to prevent us from reaching the Dark Tower. We must not allow him to succeed." But the way to Barad-dûr was long and perilous, and the enemy's eyes were upon them. The final test of their courage and resolve was yet to come. The great host of Mordor moved like a black tide across the landscape of Middle-earth. From the Morannon to the Pelennor field, the earth trembled beneath the feet of orcs and trolls beyond counting. The sky grew dark with the smoke of their passage, and the very air seemed to thicken with malice. At the head of this vast army rode the 9 Nazgûl, their forms now more terrible than ever before. The Witch King had been reborn in the fires of Mount Doom, his power increased tenfold by his master's wrath. His new steed was a creature of pure shadow, its eyes like burning coal, and its breath like the wind from the void. But it was not the Nazgûl that struck fear into the hearts of the defenders. From the depths of Barad-dûr had come creatures that had not walked the earth since the elder days, the dragons of the north, awakened from their long slumber by the call of their ancient master. At their head flew Skata the worm, her scales black as midnight, and her breath like liquid fire. The news of this host's approach reached Minas Tirith just as the sun was setting behind the western mountain. The white city stood like a beacon in the gathering darkness, its 7 levels gleaming with the light of countless torches. But even its mighty walls seemed fragile in the face of the approaching storm. In the highest tower of the citadel, Denethor sat upon his throne, his eyes fixed upon the palantir of Minas Tirith. The Seeing Stone showed him visions of the approaching doom, and his face grew pale with despair. "All is lost," He whispered to himself, "The enemy's power is too great. We cannot stand against such might." But his words were overheard by Prince Imrahil, who had returned from the battle at Osgiliath. The prince of Dol Amroth's armor was battered, and his sword was notched, but his spirit remained unbroken. "My lord," he said firmly, "we have faced darkness before and emerged victorious. The light has not yet failed, and while it endures, we must not despair." Denethor's laugh was bitter. "The light? What light remains in this world? The elves sail west. The dwarves hide in their mountain halls, and the race of men grows ever weaker. There is no hope left." But even as he spoke, the sound of horns echoed across the Pelennor fields. From the north came the riders of Rohan, their spears gleaming in the torchlight. King Eomer rode at their head, his golden hair streaming behind him like a banner of hope. Behind the Rohirrim came others, the men of Dale, led by Brand, son of Bane, the elves of Lothlorien, their banners shining with the light of the Malorn trees, and from the distant shores of the Bay of Belfalas, the ships of the southern fiefs, their sails white as the wings of gulls. "The free peoples have answered the call," said Imrahil with satisfaction. "We do not stand alone." Meanwhile, far to the east, the small company that carried the Arkenstone was making its way through the desolate lands of Rhûn. The journey was fraught with peril, for the enemy's servants were everywhere, and the very land itself seemed to turn against them. Faramir led the way, his ranger's skills proving invaluable in the hostile terrain. Behind him came Balin and his surviving kinsmen, their axes ready for battle. Glorfindel brought up the rear, his keen eyes watching for signs of pursuit. But it was Aldenor who proved to be their greatest asset. The old lore master's knowledge of the ancient roads was encyclopedic, and he guided them along paths that had been forgotten for centuries. Through hidden valleys and over mountain passes, they traveled, always keeping to the shadows, always moving toward their goal. On the third day of their journey, they encountered something that chilled their blood. In a valley that should have been empty, they found the remains of a great battle. The ground was littered with the bones of men and horses, and the air was thick with the scent of ancient death. "What happened here?" asked Balin, his voice hushed with awe. Aldenor knelt beside one of the skeletons, his fingers tracing the runic inscriptions on its armor. "These are the bones of the Northmen," he said softly. "They fell here in the days of the kinstrife, when the realm of Gondor was torn by civil war. But look, see how they are arrayed? They did not die in retreat, but in victory." Indeed, the skeletons were arranged in a great circle, their weapons still clutched in their bony hands. At the center of the circle lay the remains of something vast and terrible, a dragon, its skull the size of a house, and its bones like the pillars of a great hall. "They slew the beast," breathed Glorfindel. "These brave men gave their lives to destroy one of the great worms of the north." But their contemplation was interrupted by a sound that made their blood run cold, the distant cry of a hunting horn. The Nazgûl had found their trail and were closing in for the kill. "Run!" said Faramir grimly. "We must reach the hidden paths before they catch us." The chase that followed was like something from the darkest nightmares. The Nazgûl's fell beasts swooped down from the sky, their claws raking the ground where the company had stood moments before. The very air seemed to freeze in their presence, and their cries could drive men mad with terror. But the hidden paths of Rhûn were treacherous, and the company's knowledge of them proved their salvation. They led their pursuers through a maze of canyons and ravines where the Nazgûl's mounts could not follow. At last, they reached the entrance to the ancient road that led to Mordor itself. The road was carved from black stone, and it descended into the earth like the gullet of some great beast. The walls were covered with runes in the black speech, and the air was thick with the scent of sulfur and decay. "The road to Barad-dûr," said Aldenor grimly. "Few who have traveled this path have ever returned to tell the tale." But there was no choice. Behind them, the Nazgûl's cries grew ever closer, and ahead lay their only hope of reaching the Dark Tower before the final battle began. As they descended into the earth, the walls around them began to glow with a sickly light. The runes seemed to writhe and shift, and the temperature rose until the very air seemed to burn their lungs. "The road is alive," whispered Balin. "It feeds upon the fear and despair of those who travel it." But Faramir pressed on, the Arkenstone's light growing brighter with each step. The pure radiance of the gem seemed to push back the darkness, and the evil runes flickered and dimmed in its presence. At last, they emerged from the underground road to find themselves in the heart of Mordor itself. The sky was black with smoke and ash, and the air was filled with the sound of hammers ringing on anvils. Before them rose the dark tower of Barad-dûr, its spires reaching toward the heavens like the fingers of some grasping hand. But they had not gone unnoticed. From the tower's heights came the sound of a horn that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. The eye of Sauron had turned upon them, and its gaze was like the heat of a forge. "We are discovered," said Glorfindel, his hand upon his sword. "The final battle begins now." The gaze of the eye was like standing naked beneath the fires of Mount Doom. It pierced through armor and flesh, through bone and sinew, seeking the very soul within. Faramir felt his strength ebbing away like water from a cracked vessel, and the Arkenstone in his hands grew cold and dim. "Do not look upon it directly," warned Glorfindel, his own face pale with strain. "The eye seeks to dominate all who gaze into its depths. Turn your thoughts inward and think of all that you hold dear." But even as he spoke, the defenses of Barad-dûr were stirring to life. From the tower's base emerged hosts of orcs and trolls, their weapons gleaming with malice. The ground shook beneath the feet of cave trolls, and the air filled with the beating of leathery wings as the fell beasts of the Nazgûl took to the sky. "We cannot fight them all," said Balin grimly, his axe gleaming in the hellish light. "There are too many, and we are but few." It was then that Aldenor spoke up, his voice carrying the authority of ancient wisdom. "We need not fight them all. The Palantir showed us the way to the foundation chamber beneath the tower. If we can reach it and place the Arkenstone upon the corrupted Mithril, then all of Sauron's works will crumble to dust." The entrance to the foundation chamber was hidden behind a waterfall of liquid fire that cascaded down the tower's western face. The heat was tremendous, and the very air seemed to burn their lungs. But Glorfindel's cloak, woven with the light of the undying lands, protected them from the worst of the flames. Beyond the waterfall lay a corridor carved from black stone, its walls lined with the skulls of the Dark Lord's enemies. The passage descended steeply into the earth, and with each step, the temperature grew higher and the air more difficult to breathe. "The very foundations of hell," muttered Balin, his beard singed by the heat. "What manner of madness drives us to venture into such a place?" But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the fate of all Middle-earth hung in the balance. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow, and its walls lined with veins of corrupted mithril that pulsed with an evil light. At the center of the chamber stood a pillar of black stone, its surface covered with runes that seemed to writhe and shift in the darkness. This was the foundation stone of Barad-dûr, the keystone upon which all of Sauron's power rested. But the chamber was not unguarded. As they approached the pillar, the shadows began to move, and from them emerged a figure that made their blood run cold. It was Sauron himself, not in his ancient form as the necromancer, but as he had been in the days of Numenor, tall and fair, with eyes like burning coal and a voice like honey mixed with poison. "Welcome, thieves and trespassers," he said with a smile that was more terrible than any frown. "You have come far to die in my halls. But before you perish, perhaps you would care to hear a tale of the true history of Middle-earth and of the lies that have been told to the children of Ilúvatar." Faramir raised the Arkenstone, its light blazing forth like a star. "We know your lies, Dark Lord. We have come to end them." Sauron's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "Lies! I am the Lord of Truth, and I will tell you truths that will shatter your mind. Do you know what the Arkenstone truly is? It is not a fragment of the Silmarils, as you have been told. It is something far more precious and far more dangerous. Despite themselves, the company found themselves listening, caught in the web of the Dark Lord's words. The Arkenstone is the heart of Arda itself, Sauron continued. It is the fragment of the music of creation that Eru Ilúvatar placed at the world's core. With it, one could reshape reality itself, could become as the Valar themselves. Why do you think I have allowed you to come so far? Why do you think I have not simply destroyed you? The implications were staggering. If the Arkenstone was truly the heart of Arda, then using it to destroy the corrupted Mithril might destroy the world itself. You hesitate, said Sauron with satisfaction. Good. You begin to understand. Give me the stone, and I will show you wonders beyond imagination. Together, we can remake this world into a paradise where suffering is unknown and death is but a memory. For a moment, the temptation was overwhelming. The promise of a world without pain, without loss, without the endless struggle between light and shadow. It was everything they had ever dreamed of. But it was Balin who broke the spell. The old dwarf stepped forward, his axe gleaming in the Arkenstone's light. Pretty words, Dark Lord, but I have lived long enough to know that nothing good ever comes from dealing with the likes of you. Sauron's fair form flickered, and for a moment, his true shape was revealed, a figure of shadow and flame, terrible beyond description. So be it. If you will not join me willingly, then you will serve me in death. The battle that followed was like nothing that had ever been fought in Middle-earth. Sauron's power was vast, beyond comprehension, and his mastery of the dark arts was complete. Lightning crackled from his fingertips, and the very stones of the chamber rose to do his bidding. But the company fought with the courage of desperation. Glorfindel's sword blazed with the light of the undying lands, and Balin's axe sang with the fury of his ancestors. Aldenor spoke words of power that had not been heard since the elder days, and Faramir's arrows found their mark again and again. Yet it was clear that they were outmatched. Sauron's power was too great, and their strength was failing. One by one, they began to fall. First Aldenor, struck down by a bolt of shadow that pierced his heart. Then two of Balin's kinsmen, crushed beneath falling stones. It was then that Faramir made the ultimate sacrifice. Seeing that the battle was lost, he threw himself toward the foundation stone, the Arkenstone blazing in his hands. But Sauron was too quick, and his blade pierced the ranger's chest before he could reach his goal. As Faramir fell, the Arkenstone rolled across the chamber floor, its light beginning to dim. Sauron moved to claim it, his eyes gleaming with triumph. But he had reckoned without the courage of the dwarf. Balin, wounded and bleeding, threw himself between the Dark Lord and the stone. His axe bit deep into Sauron's form, and for a moment, the Dark Lord staggered. In that instant, Glorfindel struck, his sword piercing the shadows that surrounded the enemy. But their victory was short-lived. Even as Sauron's form began to dissolve, his voice echoed through the chamber, filled with malice and hate. "You have won nothing," he snarled. "Without the Arkenstone, you cannot destroy the foundation. The tower will stand, and my power will endure. You have only delayed the inevitable." And indeed, the corrupted mithril in the walls continued to pulse with evil light, and the tower above them continued to stand. Their quest had failed, and the darkness would prevail. But then, from the shadows, came a voice that none of them had expected to hear. "Perhaps," said the voice, "but you have forgotten something, my old master." From the darkness stepped a figure that made even Sauron's fading form recoil in surprise. It was Saruman the White, but not as they had known him. His robes were clean and bright, his staff gleamed with power, and his eyes held the light of redemption. "Saruman," breathed Sauron, "but you are dead. I felt you die at Isengard." "Death is not the end for all," replied Saruman calmly. "The Valar have given me a second chance to atone for my betrayal of the light, and I bring word from the west. The final battle is about to begin." The transformation of Saruman was a wonder to behold. Gone was the corruption that had marked his features in his final days, replaced by a nobility that spoke of his original nature as one of the Maiar. His staff blazed with power that seemed to rival the Arkenstone itself, and his voice carried the authority of one who had looked upon the face of Manwë himself. "The Valar have not forgotten Middle-earth," he said, his eyes fixed upon the fading form of Sauron. "Even now, the ships of the Eldar sail from the Grey Haven, and upon them come the Istari, renewed. Gandalf the White has returned to his full power, and Radagast the Brown brings with him the fury of all growing thing." Sauron's form flickered and solidified, his surprise giving way to rage. Impossible. The Valar swore never again to intervene directly in the affairs of Middle-earth. "They swore never to send armies," Saruman corrected. "But they said nothing of sending aid to those who would stand against the darkness. And you, my former master, have grown too bold. The corruption of the Arkenstone itself was a step too far." The revelation hit the company like a physical blow. "The Arkenstone is corrupted?" gasped Glorfindel. Saruman nodded grimly. "Did you not wonder why Sauron allowed you to come so far? The stone you carry is not the true heart of the mountain, but a clever forgery, infused with the Dark Lord's malice. Every step you have taken has been guided by his will." Faramir, struggling to his feet despite his wound, stared at the stone in his hand. Now that he knew the truth, he could see the corruption that lay beneath its surface, a darkness that pulsed with the rhythm of a malevolent heart. "Then we have been fools," he said bitterly. "We have played right into his hands." "Not fools," said Saruman gently. "Deceived, yes, but your courage and sacrifice have not been in vain. For in allowing me to witness your deed, the Valar have seen fit to grant me the power to set things right." He raised his staff, and its light blazed forth like a star. The corrupted Arkenstone in Faramir's hands began to crack and crumble, its false beauty falling away like a shed skin. But as it did, something else began to emerge, a small, pure gem that blazed with the light of the undying land. "The true Arkenstone," breathed Balin. "It was hidden within the false one all along." "The Dark Lord's greatest weakness," said Saruman, "is his inability to create. He can only corrupt and destroy, but even his corruption cannot touch that which is truly pure. The real Arkenstone has been protected by the very malice that sought to destroy it." Sauron's roar of rage shook the very foundations of the tower. "You think this changes anything? The Mithril is still corrupted, and the tower still stands. One small stone cannot undo the work of ages." But Saruman's smile was serene. "Can it not? You have forgotten, old friend, that the Arkenstone is not merely a gem, but a fragment of the music of creation itself. And I remember the song." What followed was beyond the power of words to describe. Saruman began to sing, his voice rising in harmonies that seemed to encompass all the music of the spheres. The true Arkenstone in Faramir's hands began to resonate with the song, its light growing brighter and brighter until it seemed to contain all the stars of heaven. The effect on the corrupted Mithril was immediate and dramatic. The evil veins that ran through the chamber walls began to crack and crumble, their dark light flickering and dying. The foundation stone itself began to groan and shift, as if the very bonds that held it together were coming undone. "No!" shrieked Sauron, his form now wavering between shadow and substance. "I will not be defeated by a song." He lunged toward Saruman, his hands wreathed in flame, but the wizard was ready. His staff met the Dark Lord's attack, and for a moment, the chamber was filled with a light so bright that none could look upon it directly. When the light faded, Sauron was gone, his form scattered to the winds, but his voice echoed through the chamber one last time, filled with malice and hate. "This is not the end," he snarled. "Even if the tower falls, my armies still march upon Minas Tirith. The free peoples will still fall, and darkness will still triumph." Saruman's expression was grim. "Perhaps, but that is a battle for another day. For now, we must complete our task." He gestured to Faramir, who still held the true Arkenstone. "Place it upon the foundation stone, and speak the words I teach you. But know this, the destruction of Barad-dûr will create a shockwave that will be felt across all Middle-earth. We must be prepared for what follows. Faramir approached the foundation stone, the Arkenstone blazing in his hand. As Saruman whispered the words of power, he repeated them, his voice growing stronger with each syllable. The ancient language of the Valar flowed from his lips, and the very air around them began to sing in harmony. When he placed the Arkenstone upon the foundation stone, the effect was instantaneous. A pulse of pure light emanated from the gem, racing through the corrupted mithril like fire through dry grass. The evil metal began to turn white-hot, then crumbled to ash. The tower above them began to sway and groan. Cracks appeared in the walls, and chunks of masonry began to fall from the ceiling. The great spire of Barad-dûr, which had stood for thousands of years as a monument to evil, was finally beginning to fall. "We must leave," said Saruman urgently. "The collapse will bring down the entire structure." But even as they fled through the crumbling corridors, they could hear the sounds of battle from above. The destruction of the tower's foundation had not gone unnoticed, and the remaining servants of darkness were converging on their position. The escape from Barad-dûr was harrowing beyond description. The very walls seemed to be alive with malice, and shadows pursued them through passages that shifted and changed with each step. But Saruman's power protected, his staff blazing like a beacon in the darkness. They emerged from the tower just as the great spire began its final collapse. The sight was both terrible and magnificent. Thousands of tons of black stone falling like a mountain in avalanche, sending shockwaves across the plain of Gorgoroth. But their triumph was short-lived. Even as Barad-dûr fell, the sky to the west began to glow with an ominous light. The armies of Mordor, deprived of their master's direct guidance, but not yet broken, were converging on Minas Tirith for the final assault. "The battle is far from over," said Saruman grimly. "Without Sauron's will to guide them, the orcs will fight with the fury of desperation. They know that defeat means annihilation, and they will sell their lives dearly." In the distance, they could see the great hosts of Mordor beginning to move, but something was wrong. The ordered ranks were beginning to break apart, and the sound of fighting could be heard even from this distance. "They turn upon each other," observed Glorfindel with satisfaction. "Without their master's will to bind them, the orcs remember their ancient hatreds." But not all of the enemy's forces were descending into chaos. The Nazgûl still flew above the battlefield, their will unbroken by their master's defeat. And at the head of the greatest host, the mouth of Sauron led his troops with grim determination. "The war is not won yet," said Faramir, his hand upon his sword. "The free peoples still stand besieged in Minas Tirith, and we are too far away to aid them." It was then that Saruman revealed the final part of his plan. "We are not as far away as you think," he said, with a mysterious smile. "The destruction of Barad-dûr has torn holes in the very fabric of space and time. Through them, we can travel vast distances in the blink of an eye." He raised his staff, and before them appeared a shimmering portal of light. Through it, they could see the walls of Minas Tirith, besieged by countless hosts of orcs and trolls. "The final battle awaits," said Saruman solemnly. "Let us go and meet our destiny." The sight that greeted them as they stepped through Saruman's portal was one of desperate valor against overwhelming odds. The Pelennor fields stretched before them, black with the armies of Mordor. The great gates of Minas Tirith had been breached, and fighting raged in the lower levels of the city itself. But the defenders had not given up hope. From the heights of the citadel, the banner of Gondor still flew, and the voices of the guards could be heard singing the ancient songs of their people. On the field below, the Rohirrim charged again and again into the ranks of the orcs, their spears gleaming like stars in the darkness. "The tide turns against them," observed Balin grimly. "They are brave, but they are outnumbered 10 to 1. Indeed, the situation looked desperate. The great Mumakil of the Southrons trampled through the ranks of the defenders, their tusks stained with blood. The siege towers of Mordor towered over the walls of the city, and from their heights, orcs poured down like a black tide. But even as they watched, a new sound echoed across the battlefield, the deep, resonant call of the horns of the west. From the Harland came ships with black sails, and upon them flew the banner of Elendil. At their prow stood a figure that made the hearts of the defenders leap with joy. "Aragorn!" cried a voice from the walls. "The king has returned!" The arrival of the dead men of Dunharrow turned the tide of the battle in an instant. The Oathbreakers, finally freed from their long torment, fell upon the armies of Mordor with terrible fury. Their ghostly blades could not be turned by armor or shield, and their voices struck fear into the hearts of even the bravest orcs. But the greatest shock was yet to come. As the dead swept across the battlefield, driving the enemy before them, a new force appeared on the horizon. From the north came the great eagles of the Misty Mountains, and upon their backs rode warriors whose presence filled the hearts of all who saw them with wonder. "The Istari," breathed Glorfindel. "They have returned in their full power." Gandalf the White rode upon Gwaihir's back, his staff blazing with the light of the undying land. Beside him flew Radagast the Brown, surrounded by a cloud of birds and beasts that answered his call. And on the greatest of the eagles rode a figure that none had expected to see. Olorin himself, the Gandalf who had been before the shadow claimed him, restored to his full Maiar nature. The effect of their arrival was immediate and dramatic. Where Gandalf's light touched the battlefield, the orcs fled in terror. Radagast's voice called to every living thing, and the very earth itself rose up to fight against the invaders. Trees uprooted themselves and marched to war, their branches like grasping arms, but it was the sight of the third wizard that truly broke the enemy's will. This was Pallando the Blue, long thought lost in the east, but now returned with the might of the valor behind him. His robes blazed with the light of stars, and his voice carried the authority of the music of creation itself. "The age of shadow is ended," he cried, his words echoing across the battlefield. "Let the light of the undying lands shine forth." The battle that followed was more like a rout than a true fight. The armies of Mordor, already shaken by the fall of Barad-dûr and the loss of their master, could not stand against the combined might of the returned Istari and the army of the dead. One by one, the great siege engines toppled, and the black banners of Mordor were trampled into the mud. But even in defeat, the enemy struck one last blow. The Witch King, seeing that all was lost, turned his fell beast toward the citadel of Minas Tirith. His target was clear: Denethor, who still sat upon his throne, lost in madness and despair. "The steward dies," shrieked the Lord of the Nazgul, "and with him the line of the kings." But his path was blocked by an unexpected defender. Eowyn, niece of King Theoden, stood upon the steps of the citadel, her sword blazing with her own inner light. She had cast aside her disguise as Durnhel and now faced the Witch King as herself, a woman of Rohan, but no less a warrior for that. "You shall not pass," she declared, her voice ringing clear across the battlefield. The duel between the Shield Maiden and the Witch King was brief but decisive. When it was over, the Lord of the Nazgul lay broken upon the stones, his crown rolling away into the shadows. Eowyn stood triumphant, though wounded, her courage having accomplished what armies could not. As the sun set over the Pelennor fields, the last of the orcs fled into the darkness. The great battle was won, and the free peoples stood victorious. But the cost had been terrible. Thousands lay dead upon the field, and the white city of Minas Tirith bore the scars of the siege. In the midst of the celebration, Faramir approached Aragorn, who now wore the crown of Gondor upon his brow. The ranger knelt before his king, but Aragorn raised him up with a smile. "Rise, friend," he said warmly. "You have served the realm far beyond the call of duty. What boon would you ask, king?" Faramir's answer was simple: "Only that we remember those who fell, and that we build a world worthy of their sacrifice." Aragorn nodded solemnly. "It shall be as you say. Let the new age begin with remembrance, and let it continue with hope." But even as they spoke, a shadow fell across the celebration. From the east came a messenger, his horse foam-flecked with the urgency of his ride. His news chilled the hearts of all who heard it. "The Easterlings march," he gasped, "a great host from Rhûn, led by one who claims to be the heir of Sauron himself. They say he bears a crown of iron and commands the allegiance of all the dark things that remain in Middle-earth." The war, it seemed, was far from over. The news of the Easterling host cast a pall over the victory celebration. Even as the dead were being honored and the wounded tended, the reality of the continuing threat became clear. The fall of Sauron had not ended the darkness. It had merely removed its guiding hand, allowing new powers to rise in its place. In the halls of Minas Tirith, the Great Council convened once more. Representatives of all the free peoples gathered around the round table that had been brought from the ruins of Osgiliath. Men and elves, dwarves and ents, united in their determination to face this new threat. "What do we know of this heir?" asked King Elisar, his brow furrowed with concern. It was Saruman who answered, his face grave. "He is called Morgomir the Black, and he claims descent from the ancient line of the Easterling king, who once served the Dark Lord in the elder days. But there is more to him than mere ambition. He bears about his neck a shard of the One Ring, taken from the fires of Mount Doom before the mountain's final eruption. The implications were staggering. A fragment of the One Ring, even a small one, would contain enough power to dominate lesser minds and command the allegiance of the dark creature that still roamed Middle-earth. "Then he must be stopped," said Prince Imrahil firmly. "We cannot allow another Dark Lord to rise in Sauron's place." But Glorfindel shook his head. "It is not so simple. The ring shard will grow in power the longer he possesses, feeding on the darkness in his heart. Already his armies stretch from the Sea of Rhûn to the borders of Mordor. To face him in open battle would be folly." "Then what do you propose?" asked Éomer, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. It was Faramir who spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. "There is another way. The Palantir of Ithilien still functions, and through it, we might learn more of this Morgomir's plans. But more than that, we might be able to turn his own power against him." All eyes turned to the ranger, and he continued, "The ring shard is both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. It binds him to the will of the ring, but it also makes him vulnerable to anyone who understands its nature. If we could somehow separate him from the shard—" "Impossible," declared Balin. "He would guard it with his life. No force in Middle-earth could pry it from his grasp." But Aldenor, who had been silent until now, suddenly looked up with a gleam in his ancient eyes. "Not by force, perhaps, but what if we could make him give it up willingly?" The plan that emerged from the council was audacious beyond belief. They would send an embassy to Morgomir, ostensibly to negotiate terms of surrender, but in reality to challenge him to single combat. The Easterling Lord's pride would not allow him to refuse such a challenge. And in the ritual combat of the ancient kings, he would be bound by laws older than Sauron himself. "But who would face him?" asked Gandalf. "This Morgomir is said to be a warrior without peer, and the ring shard will give him strength beyond mortal measure." The answer came from an unexpected source. From the shadows stepped a figure that made them all catch their breath. It was Isildur, not as he had been in life, but as he had become in death. The ancient king's spirit had been summoned by the crisis, bound to Middle-earth by his failure to destroy the ring so long ago. "I will face him," said the ghostly king, his voice carrying the weight of ages. "It was my failure that led to this day, and it is my duty to set things right." But Aragorn shook his head. "The debt is not yours alone to bear, ancestor. I am Isildur's heir, and I claim the right of challenge." The debate that followed was long and heated, but in the end, it was decided that both would go. Isildur to challenge Morgomir by the ancient laws, and Aragorn to ensure that justice was done, regardless of the outcome. The embassy set forth at dawn, riding under a banner of truce toward the great host of the Easterling. The sight that greeted them was awe-inspiring and terrible. Hundreds of thousands of warriors arrayed across the plain, their weapons glinting in the morning sun. At their head stood a great pavilion of black silk, and from its peak flew a banner bearing the red eye of Sauron. Morgomir himself was a figure from nightmares. Tall as a giant and broad of shoulder, he wore armor of black iron that seemed to drink in the light around it. His helm was wrought in the likeness of a dragon's skull, and his eyes glowed with an inner fire. About his neck hung the ring shard, its surface crawling with dark runes. "So," he said in a voice like grinding stone, "the king of Gondor comes to treat with me. What terms do you offer for the lives of your people?" Aragorn's answer rang clear across the assembled host. "I offer no terms, pretender. I challenge you to single combat. By the ancient laws of the kings, let us settle this matter with steel, as our ancestors did in the elder days." Morgomir's laugh was like the sound of breaking bone. "You would face me? You, who could not even stand against my master's weakest servant? I accept your challenge, little king. But know that when you fall, your people will serve me as they served Sauron." The circle was drawn upon the plain, marked out with spears driven deep into the earth. According to the ancient laws, no weapons could be brought into the circle save those forged by the combatants' own hands. Both warriors bore blades of their lineage. Aragorn wielded Andúril, reforged from the shards of Narsil, while Morgomir drew a blade of black iron that seemed to writhe with a life of its own. The duel began at the stroke of noon, when the sun stood highest in the sky. The two warriors circled each other like wolves, each seeking an opening in the other's guard. Morgomir's strength was tremendous, augmented by the power of the ring shard, and his blade left trails of shadow in the air. But Aragorn was no mere mortal warrior. He was the heir of Isildur, and in his veins flowed the blood of the Númenórean. More than that, he bore within his heart the love of his people and the hope of all free folk. When Andúril met the black blade, sparks flew like falling stars. The battle raged for hours, neither warrior able to gain a decisive advantage. Morgomir's power was vast, but Aragorn's skill was legendary. Again and again, the Easterling lord pressed his attack, only to find his blows turned aside by the king's defense. But as the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, it became clear that time was not on Aragorn's side. The ring shard was feeding Morgomir new strength with each passing moment, while the king grew ever more weary. It was then that Isildur's spirit made itself known. The ghostly king appeared at the edge of the circle, his hand upon the hilt of his ethereal sword. "Morgomir of the East," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of the ancient kings. "You claim the inheritance of the Dark Lord, but you know nothing of its true cost. I who bore the ring, I who felt its weight upon my soul, tell you this: power corrupts all who wield it, and in the end, it will consume you as it consumed my master." Morgomir snarled in response. "Pretty words from a dead king. Your failure led to this day, Isildur. If you had not been weak, Sauron would have fallen long ago." "Yes," said Isildur simply, "I was weak, but weakness can be overcome, while pride cannot. And you, Lord of the East, are prouder than Sauron ever was." The exchange of words had given Aragorn the respite he needed. With renewed strength, he pressed his attack, and this time, Andúril's blade found its mark. The sword pierced Morgomir's armor and bit deep into his flesh. But even as he fell, the Easterling Lord's hand closed around the ring shard. With his dying breath, he spoke words in the black speech, and the fragment began to glow with a malevolent light. "If I cannot rule," he gasped, "then let all the world burn with me." The ring shard exploded with a force that shook the very foundations of the earth. The blast swept across the plain like a tide of fire, consuming everything in its path. For a moment, it seemed that Morgomir's dying curse would succeed, and all would be lost. But then, Isildur's spirit stepped forward, his form blazing with a light that matched the shard's darkness. The two powers met and clashed, light against shadow, redemption against damnation. "No," said the ancient king, his voice filled with a terrible resolve. "I failed once to destroy the ring's power, but I will not fail again." With that, he grasped the ring shard with his spectral hand, and both spirit and fragment vanished in a burst of light that could be seen from the Grey Havens to the Sea of Rhûn. When the light faded, the threat was ended. Morgomir lay dead upon the plain, and with him fell the last great power of darkness in Middle-earth. The Easterling host, leaderless and broken, began to disperse, many of them laying down their arms in surrender. The Third Age had truly ended, and the Age of Men had begun. 5 years had passed since the final defeat of the darkness, and Middle-earth had begun to heal from the wounds of war. The great cities were rebuilt, the roads were safe once more, and the fields bloomed with plenty. The Fourth Age had dawned, bringing with it an era of peace and prosperity that would last for centuries to come. In the halls of Minas Tirith, King Elisar held court, dispensing justice with the wisdom of his ancestors. The city had been rebuilt grander than ever before, its white stones gleaming in the sunlight like a jewel set among the mountains. The tree of the kings bloomed in the court of the fountain, its silver leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. But on this particular day, the king's attention was not on matters of state, but on a group of old friends who had gathered to mark a solemn anniversary. It was 5 years to the day since the fall of Barad-dûr, and those who had been present at that momentous event had come together to remember both their triumph and their losses. Faramir stood upon the balcony overlooking the Pelennor field, his gaze distant. The years had been kind to him. He had married Éowyn of Rohan, and their children brought joy to the halls of Ithilien. But the weight of memory still lay heavy upon his shoulders. "You are thinking of Glorfindel," said a voice behind him. He turned to see Gandalf approaching, his white robes rustling in the wind. "Among others," Faramir replied. "So many gave their lives that we might see this day. Sometimes I wonder if we are worthy of their sacrifice." Gandalf's eyes twinkled with the wisdom of ages. "Worthiness is not something to be measured, my friend. It is something to be earned, day by day, through the choices we make and the lives we lead. The dead do not ask for perfection from the living, only that we try to be better than we were." From the courtyard below came the sound of laughter, the children of the noble houses at play, their voices bright with innocence. Among them ran a young boy with dark hair and gray eyes, the image of his father at that age. "Prince Barahir grows strong," observed Gandalf with a smile. "He will make a fine king one day, when his time comes." Faramir nodded, his expression softening. "Aragorn has been a good teacher. The boy knows the value of humility, as well as courage." They were joined by others. Balin, now ancient even by dwarven standards, but still hale of heart. Éomer, his golden hair touched with silver, but his spirit as fierce as ever. Prince Imrahil, bearing the wisdom of years upon his weathered face. "An odd fellowship we make," said Balin with a chuckle. "A king, a steward, a marshal, a prince, and a wizard. Who would have thought we would all live to see the Fourth Age?" "Not I," admitted Éomer. "There were times during the siege when I was certain we would all meet our end in the fires of Mordor. Yet here we stand," said Imrahil quietly, "and the world is better for our efforts." From the great tower of the citadel came the sound of a bell, its voice clear and sweet as it marked the hour. It was a new bell, cast from the metal of broken weapons gathered from the battlefields, and its tone spoke of peace rather than war. "The Istari depart soon," said Gandalf, his voice touched with sadness. "Our task in Middle-earth is complete, and we are called to return to the undying lands. Saruman has already sailed from the Grey Haven, and I will follow before the year is out." The news cast a shadow over the gathering, though it was not unexpected. The wizards had been sent to Middle-earth to guide and protect during the time of darkness, and with that darkness ended, their mission was complete. "Will we see you again?" asked Faramir. Gandalf's smile was enigmatic. "Who can say? The paths of the undying lands are not closed to mortal men, though few have the wisdom or the need to walk them. But I suspect our stories are far from over, my friend. In ages yet to come, when new darkness threatens the world, perhaps new heroes will arise to stand against it." As if summoned by his words, a great eagle alighted upon the balcony's railing. It was Gwaihir the Windlow, his golden eyes bright with intelligence. "I bring word from distant lands," the great bird announced in his deep voice. "The darkness is truly ended. From the ice bay of Forochel to the desert wastes of Far Harad, the free peoples prosper, and the wild things of the earth know peace." "And yet," said a new voice, There are still shadows in the far corners of the world. They turn to see a figure approaching from the depths of the citadel, tall and fair, with silver hair and eyes like stars. It was Elrond half-elven, come from Rivendell to bid farewell before sailing into the west. "My lord," said Aragorn, bowing deeply to his foster father, "I had not expected to see you here." "Nor I you, son of my heart," replied Elrond with a smile. "But I would not depart without saying farewell to those who saved the world. And I bring news that may interest you all." He gestured toward the east, where the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "The elves are not the only ones departing Middle-earth. The Ents grow weary of the world of men, and many will pass into the deepest forests, there to sleep until the world has need of them again. The dwarves withdraw to their mountain halls, content to work in stone and metal. Even the hobbits of the Shire speak of distant lands and new adventures. The age of the elder kindreds passes," said Gandalf softly. "The fourth age belongs to men, for good or ill." "Then let us ensure it is for good," said Aragorn firmly. "The crown of Gondor and Arnor will not be worn by tyrants, nor will the realm be ruled by fear. We have seen what darkness can accomplish. Let us show the world what light can do." As the night deepened, one by one the members of the Fellowship departed, until only Faramir and Gandalf remained upon the balcony. The wizard's eyes were fixed upon the western sky, where the evening star blazed with unusual brightness. "You will be missed," said Faramir quietly. "As will you all," replied Gandalf. "But this is not an ending, it is a beginning. The fourth age will bring wonders beyond imagining, and though we will not be here to see them all, we have played our part in making them possible." He turned to face the ranger, his eyes twinkling with ancient mirth. "Besides, I suspect the world has not seen the last of heroes. In generations to come, when new challenges arise, new champions will step forward to meet them. The blood of Númenor runs strong in the line of the kings, and courage is not so easily extinguished." From the courtyard below came the sound of singing, the guards beginning their nightly vigil, their voices raised in the ancient songs of Gondor. But tonight, the songs spoke not of war and sorrow, but of hope and peace. "Do you think it will last?" asked Faramir. "This peace we have won?" Gandalf was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Nothing lasts forever, my friend. Peace and war, light and darkness, hope and despair, they are all part of the great wheel that turns through the ages. But each victory against the darkness makes the next victory more likely, and each act of courage inspires others to courage." He placed a hand on Faramir's shoulder, and for a moment, the ranger felt the weight of years lift from his spirit. "The siege of Barad-dûr is ended," Gandalf continued, "but the siege of the heart continues. Every day, in small ways and large, we choose between light and darkness. That choice is the true victory, and it is one that can never be taken from us." As the wizard spoke, the evening star grew brighter still, until it seemed to rival the moon itself. From its light seemed to come a voice, faint but clear, speaking words in the high elvish tongue. "I, Elbereth Gilthoniel, O Menel Palandiriel, Nacherid Palandiriel, O Galadremin Enorath." "A blessing," translated Gandalf softly, "from she who kindles the stars upon all who love the light." And in that moment, Faramir understood that their victory had been more than the defeat of a single enemy. It had been the preservation of hope itself. The fourth age stretched before them, bright with possibility. And though new challenges would surely come, the light would never be entirely extinguished. The siege of Barad-dûr was ended, but the story of Middle-earth would continue, written by each new generation in deeds of courage and compassion. And in the halls of memory, the heroes of the Third Age would be remembered always, their sacrifice a beacon for all who would stand against the darkness in ages yet to come. As the stars wheeled overhead and the city settled into peaceful slumber, the last guardian of the old age and the first steward of the new stood together in companionable silence, watching over a world reborn. The siege was ended. The dawn had come.